I Found a Vampire's Journal. Written and narrated by Lady Spookaria, and featuring The Darkest Hour. I travelled to my grandmother's house. It was a rural cottage in a sleepy village in England. The community was small, reserved, and very much believed in keeping up appearances. My grandmother was getting older, and while I was there on a mini holiday during school break, I would be helping her minimize her belongings, look into the local aged care homes, and I have to admit, I felt guilty about doing this to her. My grandmother was a fiercely independent woman, and always liked doing things her own way. The thought of her being dependent on other people terrified her, and the lingering reminder of mortality filled me with a sense of dread. I knew what was going to come someday. She hugged me and I could feel her bony frame, kissed my cheek and invited me in for some breakfast. I sat at the circular kitchen table while she cooked a big English breakfast. I looked around. Everything looked exactly as I remembered it, and the cottage kitchen was small. There were bouquets of flowers, an old-style stove that was mostly ornamental, and almost everything was made out of solid wood. My grandmother was quite choosy with the technology she chose to have. There were no boomer moments where she would try to use social media. She preferred to call or to send a letter. I used to think it was weird, but now I only ever think of it fondly. I still have all the letters she wrote to me during her life. After we ate the breakfast, we cleaned up and began to work. My job would be clearing out the old attic. There was a pull-down attic ladder. It was too difficult for my grandmother to go up there by herself, and besides, I love the idea of going through all the old belongings. There were a lot of valuable antiques, I was told. The wooden ladder creaked as I made my way up. I clicked on the light switch. It flickered before turning on and I looked around. It was a perfect attic with a variety of old furniture draped in a protective sheet. Everything coated in a layer of dust from no one disturbing it. I didn't like the idea that a lot of these precious family heirlooms would be sold. Maybe my grandmother would let me keep some of the items. I opened a wooden, leather-bound chest and it made a sound as the lid was pried open. Inside was a feathered hat. It reminded me of a decadent pirate, and I carefully lifted it up. As I examined it, I wondered who owned it and what the story was behind it. I kept rummaging through the items. I found some old black and white photographs. I stared at them. They were of a family, all standing stiff together in order to take the best possible picture, and I wasn't exactly sure about the time period of their clothing. Perhaps it was the 1800s. I rummaged again, then pulled out a leather-clad book. It was tied shut with some twine. Sat cross-legged and opened the book. The pages were a fawn brown, aged, and the handwriting was absolutely beautiful. The first date read,
18th September, 1801.
I opened my eyes with surprised interest at the date, then curled up against the chest to get comfortable, and continued reading. A finger lazily moved below the line to assist me in keeping pace.
The world for me has changed. I'm not who I was, and God has forsaken me.
I thought that was a little dramatic, but kept reading.
Only you, my journal, can I express my truth and my desires. A place where I'm not bound by the pressures of marriage, family, duty, and honor. I can be myself for once, who I truly am. I suppose I need to introduce myself. My name is Charlotte. I am born to a wealthy, aristocratic family. I have a father, a mother, a brother. His name is Jonathan, and a younger sister, Emily. Each of them I will describe later. My father's side, we are wealthy merchants, new money, so to speak, while my mother's side is old aristocracy, and only desperation for funds allowed my parents to marry.
So far, I didn't recognize the names. I've never been knowledgeable about my family tree, or had any interest in it either.
I have lived a sheltered life, always accompanied to ensure my safety, security. I'm never allowed to experience what the world has to offer without a chaperone. I read stories. People having these incredible adventures in foreign lands, or the lives of those who seize every moment, while I remain here, in a privileged life, where others make all of my decisions for me. All of my friends were young women exactly like me. All from wealthy backgrounds, yet it was always our fathers, brothers, husbands, or sons who would own our property. Since I'm a young woman in high society with an excellent pedigree, I'm expected to marry in a way that would advance my family's position in society. Since childhood, I was told what my fate would be. The date always seemed so far away. A distant dream or something I would have to endure, never actually face.
Again, there was nothing surprising here. A lot of marriages were arranged between families.
Now I must face it tonight.
The page ended there. I wanted to know more. And you could say it was the nosy gossiper in me. But this sounded like it could get juicy. I could find out more about her life. I turned the page.
19th September, 1801. Tonight I will meet with a potential suitor from an equally prominent family at the engagement of another wealthy woman. Rumor has it that she's often sickly and has been kept hidden from society, even managing to ensnare the affection of a duke. I arrived there with my cousin and my parents as chaperones. The night was going incredibly well. I danced and was able to speak to a handsome man. William. It's too soon to be sure. However, our fathers have begun to talk about the possible union between us.
I wondered whether this man could have been one of my relatives. I wasn't sure who this woman was, as I wasn't sure who the sickly woman was either. All I knew was Charlotte's perspective. I was interrupted by my grandmother calling me from downstairs. The aroma of a roast dinner greeted me first, and I needed no more encouragement. I awkwardly held the book, climbed down the stairs, and saw my grandmother in the kitchen, taking the roast duck out of the oven. There were potatoes, pumpkin, and other veggies. I didn't expect her to go through all this trouble for me. My stomach grumbled in eager anticipation. I stopped near my grandmother to assist, but she gestured impatiently to my seat, and I sat down at the circular dining table. The journal placed beside me. Strangely, I loathed the idea of letting it out of my sight, even for a moment. A plate of delicious food was in front of me when... "You haven't been able to put the book down, have you, dear?" my grandmother asked. She... knew? Yes, how do you know about her, the author? I do. I'm not going to spoil it for you. You need to read it yourself. I believe some of her belongings are up in the attic too. She answered while pouring gravy over absolutely everything on her plate. I felt like a detective, seeking out knowledge. My grandmother was like this all the time. She never gave me an answer. Always encouraged me to find information on my own without any bias. It was one of the reasons why I enjoyed spending time with her. We chatted while we ate. The food was delicious and the conversation was excellent. I couldn't help but have my eye drawn back to the book. I could have sworn I heard whispers coming from it. The seductive words led me to indulge in more of the pages. The meal was finished. I cleaned up and tried to focus on finishing my task. My attention kept getting drawn back to the book. With a full tummy and feeling content, I picked up the book from the table and walked into the small room set aside for me. I closed the door and sat down on the bed. The bed springs creaked as I did so. I opened the book and continued reading.
William was incredibly handsome. We didn't fumble when we danced together. It was a magical night. The music, the food, the company. It was a dream. My happiest moment, until there was the sound of screaming. William pushed me behind him, and everyone ran around blindly. Men were shouting to get the women and children out. Men who came armed went to deal with whatever the horrid creature was. The Duke, who had come to dine the host daughter, had been dragged out by the servants. People ran, and I could have sworn I saw the hostess daughter, the sickly one, walking. She looked healthy, so healthy. There was blood on her mouth, down her neck, along her cleavage. I stared. This was surely a wild dream. It had to be. I remember my eyes being locked on her, with William standing in front of the bloodlust-filled creature and pushing me aside. My memory fails me. I do not remember what happened when the blood-soaked maiden approached. Fangs bared, and blood caused her gown to cling to her body. This part only God, or perhaps the devil, remembers. I awoke with the sound of sucking. The pale creature held William in her arms. The top part of his clothing had been torn away and revealed his bare chest. She was drinking his blood, swallowing it by the mouthful, while William's hand trembled idly. I watched, spellbound and frozen in place. Her pale neck swallowed his blood, and I knew I should have run while she was distracted. I could have hid or fled. Both things would have given me a chance of preserving my life.
What the hell was this? It went from entertaining family gossip to this being a supernatural tale? I kept reading. There weren't any more dates. The handwriting was more erratic now.
I watched when she took his final breath, and it fell silent. She looked at me. Her hand lifted in a graceful gesture, one that was in sharp contrast to the claws on her fingertips. I understood how Eve had been seduced now. I reached down to her, took her hand in my own, and she pulled me down on the fresh corpse of my betrothed. I tasted his blood on her lips, our bodies intertwined, and soon I felt her fangs. There was a sting. It hurt. I could never describe how pleasurable it was. I felt the world change around me. My heart fluttered for the final time. Life left me, and I fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. I thought death had finally claimed me. I woke up in my bed, safe at home, and I was told that men and animals attacked us. There were many injuries, many were killed. I was fortunate to be awake, even more blessed to be alive after the onslaught. I vaguely remember trying to tell them about the woman. She was covered in blood and had fangs. My parents told me I had such a shock it was my mind's way of coping with what I endured. Forgive me. I'm recounting this from memory, and I believe I was on medicine for the pain. My neck was bandaged. Whatever animal had managed to attack me, I had lost a lot of blood. I lay in bed. Nothing seemed to work. I remembered hearing my family, all talking around me, about me. They said I was cursed now, forsaken, that God had abandoned me, that I needed to be taken care of. I knew what that meant. The grim tone left no secrets. My parents left, weeping and crying, even though they were just going to my cousin's house for a visit. 2 men came into my room with stakes. I was weak, yet guided by my depravity. I pulled one close. My fangs tore into their neck, and I feasted for the first time. The taste, the smell, the sensations were all euphoric. I left the corpses for my family to tend to. I stole some money, wore strong, sturdy clothing, and struggled to put them on without servants assisting me. and I looked around the place I grew up one final time. It all felt like I was living a dream. I left before my family returned.
There was a lightning strike and I jumped at the sound. Vampire? That didn't make sense. That wasn't realistic. It had to be a work of fiction. Maybe the author was writing in this format to try it out. It didn't make sense otherwise. I wrapped the blanket around my shoulders. I put a finger inside the book to hold it in place. There was a knock at the door. My grandmother came in with a mug of hot chocolate, and clearly she assumed I was staying the night. She was right. I took a sip of the drink and she closed the door. I opened the book and kept reading. Again, there were no specific dates or anything to mark the passage of time.
My new life was bold and daring. I felt reborn, blessed with new senses. I could see far better now than I could before, and even in the cold dread of night, all my senses were heightened, and I wanted nothing more than to experience everything. I went to the lowest of places, taverns, places where the wayward would tread. I was greeted with a mixture of fascination, scorn, hatred, and it did not take long before some unfriendly gentleman wished to take advantage of a lone traveling woman, accompanied by her guardians, and I was excited. Perhaps I was born to be an actor. I gushed with gratitude when they told me they would lead me to safer lodgings. The leader smirked, his heart quickened with deceit, and I knew they planned something. I followed them, only to sense two others behind me, walking. I loved the excitement of danger. They grabbed me. I can't remember what they said, and in a blur, I hunted. Each person tasted different. These ones tasted like alcohol and the poor quality food they consumed. I left the bodies. I felt free, invincible, and secretly praised the nobleman's daughter who went on a rampage for my new life. All my blessings were thanks to her. I enjoyed hunting those who I deemed were wicked. They were the ones who desired to die in horrible, cruel ways. I loved the shock on their faces when they realized they were deceived, and now the prey. The thought of killing an innocent or someone who intended me no harm sickened me. I did not wish to have the sin on my soul. I was the Reaper, the sword of God.
As I read, I realized it sounded as though this was a recollection of memories, rather than a daily recording of what had happened. I idly tapped my fingertips on the surface of the book, deep in thought, and pondered what to make of this. This was a work of fiction, yet it doesn't explain why my grandmother didn't wish to share it. The next couple of pages were filled with her talking about how she was here as a divine punishment, that God had sent her. From the looks of things, she hadn't even been a vampire for that long, and already she felt this way about herself. She believed herself to be invincible. I secretly wished I had this much confidence in myself and my abilities, how those who had done wrong would be punished, so the righteous could remain free. I glossed over it. I heard enough preachy stuff now and then anyway. I didn't want to read it here too. I found a part that sounded interesting.
I survived my first 25 years as a vampire. I was told later that it was a dangerous time for these fledglings. They were bold, too dangerous, drew the attention of those who were trained in hunting vampires right to them. Many would perish unless they were taken in by a coven of vampires. The world is the same for witches. At this time, I've heard of them, yet I've not encountered any. I struggle to find out more information about my sire. It is said that her story is quite varied. Some said her name was Margaret, that she was the child of some lord or another in the 16th century. I was puzzled by this. Her family still intact after all this time. It made no sense to me. Her mother, a descendant of hers, posed as her sister. I've also heard that her name was Celeste, that she was born much later. It does not matter. I seek her out in hopes that one day I will have answers about that night. The coven I now spend my time with is an interesting group. There is Rashid, a Moor, turned many years ago, speaks many languages, and shares my desires to only punish wrongdoers. Next is Helga, a Viking, a shield maiden who died on the battlefield only to be fed on and changed. The companion for the last vampire, her mate and beloved, a knight called Reginald. Together, we became a family, and together, they guided me through my early years. I do not believe I would have survived without them. We have begun our travels around the world. I saw sights in the elusive darkness that I never would have normally. I saw the majesty of the pyramids, the ruins of ancient temples to gods both remembered and forgotten. Walked through the libraries of Timbuktu, saw the ghosts of the Colosseum in person, still fighting their eternal battle. I wrote down bits and pieces of what I experienced. Each new place brought a sense of wonder for me, and eventually, the memory of home pulled me close. I wanted to return home. I missed my human family. Together, we traveled back to London, and I saw people with familiar faces, or rather, familiar features. They looked similar to my family, but were not. It was only now I realized that 100 years had passed. The family I knew were all in their graves, lost to me, and I wept that I never got a chance to say goodbye. The amount of things I wanted to tell them was beyond number. The regrets clung to my soul, and I stood vigil over their graves. My face was always hidden. At first, I wept countless tears, and soon I ran out. I was numb. I wanted them to return to me. Nothing would bring them back now. I discovered my brother had married, had a daughter of his own before he passed away. She too had given birth to a daughter, and so on. My human family, through her, had survived. I discovered their home. It was a far cry from the wealthy home my parents were raised in. My brother, Jonathan, had turned to alcohol to console himself, would often dream of terrors. In doing so, the family fortune disappeared, and the world changed. I would knock and leave gifts for them. They needed a new piece of clothing, it would be delivered. They needed money, the same. I became their silent benefactor, and never became involved. It made me feel both human and divine. This went on for years. The children grew up, became old, they died. Their children, and their children, taking their place. I was known as the family angel, a title I cherished, until one time I was discovered by an innocent child, Arabella.
I wasn't sure if I was mistaken or not. There could have potentially been more of them in the family. My grandmother's name was Arabella.
War had broken out. There were mass bombings on London that left buildings destroyed, many deaths. I had seen weapons of war being used. Nothing like this. I heard tales of fire reaching the sky and leaving nothing but shadows in their wake. Lost souls who would wander, lost and broken. She had to be taken out of the city, and I followed her to the countryside. Arabella's parents both died. She was adopted by the family who took her in, and she was happy. At nighttime, she would come sit by me under the shade of an old oak tree. We would share stories about our different worlds. The discovery renewed my sense of excitement about the world. I watched her grow while I remained the same. She married, had children, even grandchildren of her own.
I had a sense of excitement being referred to in the journal. I stopped there, exhaled slowly and took it all in. My grandmother was related to a vampire. I took a mouthful of my now cold hot chocolate and looked at my phone. It was late. I closed the book and snuggled into the warm sheets, and soon fell asleep. I dreamed of a beautiful woman entering the room. The aroma of her perfume filled it. Her pale skin glowed in the splendor of the full moon. She smiled with ruby red lips and a curl of ebony hair. Her hand brushed a stray hair from my forehead. She ran her fingertips along the curved spine of the book, the part where the leather lifted up and had torn.
"Ah, so this is where I left you,"
she whispered. Not to me, but to the book itself. I woke up the next morning feeling heavy. My head felt strange and I lazily stood up, stretched and went to wash my face before I started heading to the dining table. I jumped when I realized I forgot the book, rushed back into the bedroom, picked it up, and followed the aroma of breakfast being cooked. I asked my grandmother about the book. She waved me off and didn't answer, still with that happy smile on her face. So far, the vampire seemed to be nothing but wholesome, like a protective guardian of the family. I talked to my grandmother about how kind she was, and about my dream. There was a flicker of recognition on her face, and she told me nothing. The more I asked her, the more she evaded the question, and thus, that only made me want to know and read more. When I walked away to my room and made my excuses for not being able to help, all she said to my departing back was, "Sometimes things can be deceiving." My grandmother's words trailed off in the distance. Considering I was supposed to be cleaning the attic, I went back to the comfortable bed, opened the journal and started reading where I left off.
Arabella gave birth to 2 children, a boy, Richard,
A name I did not recognize.
and a daughter who was stillborn.
Wait, this didn't make sense. My grandmother was supposed to be my mother's mother. This was a bit of family drama right here.
The boy, Richard, grew into a strong, handsome man. I watched from a distance, as always. The family kept changing, and Arabella's face began to wither. Richard got married, and I did not like the woman he dated. She desired his money, the wealth from his family name, and cared little for the man. I broke my own rule, to guide, to gently interfere, and one day I decided that it was necessary for me to do so. I saw the young woman Richard was to marry, Eliza, I think her name was. I decided to greet her, found myself drawn to her, for all the wrong reasons. Her eyes lit up at wealth and dimmed whenever Richard spoke. I assisted her in meeting her demise, watched Richard mourn, and soon he found a new spouse. There were many children that followed. I cannot remember all of their names. They and their descendants are spread around the continents.
I was on the edge of my seat. I never realized my family tree was so different from what I remembered, and I grinned at the thought. I'd be confronting my grandmother about this, but the house gradually became cold. I tightened my blanket around me and kept reading.
Arabella's condition made her sickly. Doctors, past and present, could never understand which illness plagued her. She refused my bite, my blessing, and I wouldn't force her. She would drink my blood to remain healthy, something I enjoy greatly. I see her every 5 years, and I made a deal with her, a compromise that would please us both. She would remain immortal, and I would claim her granddaughter as a companion.
Wait, what? I looked up and saw her in the doorframe. Her dark hair, curled and well-groomed under her cap. Her timeless eyes peered under a black lace veil. that only half concealed her face. The transparent fabric only highlighted her features. Painted lips turned upward in a smile. Her traveling jacket concealed her body.
I have come for you, child.
I hope you enjoyed this story. Please check out my amazing guest, The Darkest Hour, who played Charlotte, and make sure you subscribe to her channel if you haven't already. She did an incredible job. This video was made with the support of my incredible channel members, Patreon, subscribers, and all my viewers. Thank you so much for supporting me. Please check out my links in the description below. Don't forget to stab the like button, leave a comment, subscribe, and hit the bell if you haven't already. Stay safe, my little spooklings. And remember, I'll be watching you.